And
Hey,
where are you?
I'm in Vancouver, Canada.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, West Coast. You?
I'm in Seacliff on Long Island,
Uh-huh.
which is on the North Shore, about 40 minutes east of Manhattan.
Hmm. Well, that's cool. So you work in probably Manhattan somewhere?
Now, I work from home. I mean, I've worked from home almost entirely my whole career. Um, but Guitar World, where I've been for 20 something years, 27 years, they're in Manhattan, and so I go in sometimes. Is this enough light? I mean,
Yeah, sure.
I could make more light if you want. Let me,
Okay.
let me see if this works.
So,
This might work. Let's see. Ah, there you go. There, now you got some light. Now it's really scary to look
all
at me.
right, folks. So, hey, we have this amazing pleasure today, and such an honor and privilege to start this because I want to start a channel called Musing Guitar Musings with Alex because I
Cool.
love guitar, right? And what better way to start than with Andy, who is our I remember him from the days with the guitar player and before the internet and before YouTube.
Yes.
We're learning from you, Andy, and it's just endless gratitude to what you did to the community, right? And to all
Wow.
guitar lovers.
Alex, thank you so much. It means everything to me. You know, from the beginning, you do the work and you want it to be good and you put it out, and more often than not, you don't hear back, because
And,
there's more
we,
work to do. You keep churning it out,
of
and
course,
but to hear that from you is that's the most important thing of all.
yeah,
I everything I did was for you, for the reader, for people who want to learn, or whether it's an interview, a transcription, a lesson, so to hear from you that it's been helpful to you, that's terrific.
oh yeah. And as I was planning for this channel, I was going back and like rewatching there's a lot of instruction, right?
Yeah.
And then, and I was going through all these like big names and watching all these instructional videos, and then I stumbled all of a sudden back to your channel. I'm like, wait a minute, this is actually to me uh, something that is unique. What you're doing, right? And I'll put it down to one thing, and you tell me if you agree or disagree. I think you have a very, I think you're the keeper of the flame, if you know what I mean. It's like there's this period in the 60s, 70s, I don't know, where the electric guitar was the king.
Yes.
And when you go back and listen to these records, they are like, it's very hard to replicate that kind of a feel, right?
Yeah, it is. Although, I mean, I just finished a double album of 18 songs, and because I grew up with the music that I think you're making reference to, a lot of records from the 60s and early 70s, Jimi Hendrix and Jeff Beck, Johnny Winter, the Allman Brothers, because that's the music that I loved the most and influenced me the most. I'm about to put out brand new music that's coming from the same place musically. So the feeling of the music, maybe you're right. Maybe I'm the keeper of a flame. That's the music. That's the musical plane that I'm on. Is the music that I heard and liked the most from then. So still to this day, that's what I look for when I play, to have that feeling and that sound, and the sound of Jimi Hendrix and Johnny Winter and Jeff Beck and Dickie Betts and Duane Allman, and Peter Green and Eric Clapton. Yeah, that's my favorite stuff.
Yeah, mine too. Yeah. So, but what you bring, I think, when I watch you play, you have that touch, which you can't buy the gear to give you that sound, but it's a
Right.
touch. And I read one interview by Frank Zappa, and he was talking about these things, and he said one thing that stayed with me. He said you had to put some garlic on your playing, and I think you have. I hope you don't mind. I think there's this kind of spice, some garlic, some touch that is a little bit dirty. It's not, because sometimes you hear those like really phenomenal technicians, but they sound like typewriters. It's just like tick, 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 it's
They
everything's,
can. They can sound like note machines. Yeah.
yeah, and super squeaky clean and all that. But where's that garlic? Where's that like special?
Well, the guitar is an interesting instrument because just the physical nature of the way it works and the way to play it, you have to put your finger down on a string and then you pluck the string and the string vibrates. And the amount of pressure that you use with your fretting hand to push the string down and the amount of attack, how hard you pick the string, is going to affect the sound of that note and the way it speaks, because that's what you're doing when you're playing guitar is you're talking with music, and instead of using words in your mouth, the guitar, then the sound of the guitar and the individual notes are the words and the sentences and the emotions and the thoughts and the expression that you're trying to communicate. And so I've tried to do this for myself, and I try to teach it to my students. You need to be aware, just like if we were talking and I was saying something nice to you, but I was yelling at you, in an angry voice, that's what you would hear. I could be saying, Alex, you're the greatest guy in the world, and yelling at you, and it sound horrible. So when you play, the delivery, the articulation, the enunciation of the words, which are the notes, um, has everything to do with what gets communicated, especially with the guitar and with musical notes. We don't have words. We don't have uh, something that could be comprehended like a specific word that someone uses when they're in a sentence. You know, uh, your choice of words when you put a sentence together is, vast. So you could express a similar feeling or idea or notion in a variety of ways with words. But of course, the same is true with a musical phrase on a musical instrument. And so uh, that is going to come down to, this stuff. And if you listen for it when you play, and if you're serious about playing, and the other thing is that if there's a feeling you want the listener to hear, you want to communicate something to them, then that's the means by which you will do it, the sound that you make. So all of us, whether we're talking about guitar players, music fans, I'm referring to, all of us music fans, whether we're talking about guitar players or saxophone players or trumpet players, we have our favorite players. And it's because they speak the language on their instrument in a way that somehow touches something in us. And so when you play, you try to do the same. That's what I always did. I don't even have to think of it. It's in there. The influence of Jimi Hendrix and Wes Montgomery and Pat Martino and John Scofield and John Coltrane and Miles Davis and everyone else hopefully is going to get filtered through and come back out in some sort of a way, you know, when I play.
Yeah, and also you probably noticed that like if we can get a bunch of friends in the room, all guitar players, have one guitar, same gear, same amp,
Yeah, right.
and ask everyone to play, it's gonna every time the guitar is gonna sound totally different.
That's absolutely true.
Wow, like that is unexplainable, right? So it's not down to strings or amp, or it's just down to the touch, how you handle that instrument, right?
That's right. And, it's not the best analogy because each person has a different voice, but 10 different people saying the same sentence is going to be received in a different way, probably 10 different ways. I could tell you something that, it's a cool story anyway. That's why I like to tell it. But it illustrates this point is two guys that I experienced because I got to know them and sit with them. Um, Both of these guys could sit and play a solid body electric guitar, not plugged in, just noodling, not even paying attention, just noodling and talking and playing. But what was coming out of the guitar sounded just like on a record blasting out of a Marshall amplifier with the same assuredness of touch and the same personality in the tone and the same musicality. And those two guys were Stevie Ray Vaughan and Eddie Van Halen.
Mhm.
They put so much time into the instrument and into the physical act of playing that it really was like breathing for them. They could just sit and not pay attention and play. And if you listened, it sounded like it was coming out of an amp on a record. Unbelievable. Like with just as much, didn't lose anything. And
Yeah,
so that's an amazing thing. And but if you're a guitar player and you want to get close to that, you have to be listening for it. You need to be listening for it when you listen to other people, and you need to listen for it when you play.
yeah, yeah. And also, have you noticed? You probably noticed. I did in my when I'm playing. Depending on the mood, you could be playing and it sounds really ugly if you're in a crappy mood and you're nervous or you're like upset. And then when you're relaxed, all of a sudden it just sings the same
Right.
guitar, right? It really depends on your mood. Also, how tense the body is, I think, because you're hugging it, right? You keep it close.
Right.
It somehow, I don't want to sound mystical here, but it really responds to your nature, right? How you feel at the moment.
It does. Although I would say though that you know, uh, as human beings, we experience a range of emotions. You don't want to be a robot, so you can't be a robot because you're not. So you can't really control your emotions. And so there are days when, or I shouldn't even say it that way. All the time, whatever frame of mind you're in is going to have an effect on the way you play. But being in a bad mood or being tired or being irritated might not result in bad playing.
Yeah,
It could result in really good playing
yeah,
that expresses something else. Um, and I can think of lots of different examples of that in some of my favorite players, like Jimi Hendrix or whatever, where you could see, if it's on film, that they're unhappy about something. And it gets filtered through their communication and it has its influence on the sound of their playing. And it's just another, you know, element in the mix of what makes the person play that way in that moment. So, um, being in a peaceful, tranquil place can produce a certain style of playing. And being really agitated and angry and in a horrible mood and like totally sleep deprived can also produce really good playing. It's just different.
it's true. Yeah, and sometimes we can't. On self-reflection, we cannot judge. Just a quick
That's
anecdote.
very true. Yes.
A friend of mine, he went for a cruise, which I never did. I'm not big on cruises, but he said I went on a cruise, and one evening we were sitting at the bar, whatnot, and the band was playing, and the saxophone player was like just blew my mind. It just brought me to tears. Beautiful. And he says, "Oh man, I didn't expect that on a cruise." So later on, the next day, he bumped into this guy. I said, "Oh, thank you so much. Last night was fantastic. Your playing was awesome." He's like, "What are you talking about?" I felt like shit. I was like throwing up, and I felt horrible. He wasn't even aware that he was playing beautiful. He was just going
Yeah.
through the emotions and like really like I thought that was horrible. So you cannot tell always, right?
I have a great joke for you, but I don't know if you're gonna want to edit it out if you put this on the internet. But you don't have. But you don't have to if it doesn't bother you. So the introspective jazz musician is sitting at the bar at the end of the gig by himself as usual, all alone, staring into his drink, you know, uh, filled with self-reflection, and all of a sudden this person taps him on the shoulder. This beautiful girl, And she goes, "Oh, excuse me, I hate to bother you. You know, I'm a little drunk. I had a few drinks. But I just wanted to tell you that the music you played tonight was the most beautiful, evocative, sensitive, emotional music I've ever heard, and it touched me in ways I've never been touched. And I'd like to take you home and make passionate love to you all night." And he said, "Did you see the first set or the second set?" Anyway,
Yeah, great.
the
Yeah,
musician joke.
I don't know. It's, yeah, so oftentimes I think because I'm biased, I'm thinking maybe electric guitar is the most perfect instrument. But there's one in my mind, one flaw, or not flaw, but one shortcoming that maybe disqualifies it. And that, in my mind, is dynamics. It's a beautiful instrument, but has very narrow. Like if you play the quietest note and the loudest, I mean, compare that to a saxophone.
I don't agree. I mean, if you've watched Buddy Guy,
Mhm.
Buddy Guy is someone who will play as loud as you can play, you know, and then he'll bring the band down to a whisper, or have the band stop,
Mhm.
and then he'll turn his guitar down to almost off, and then he'll play and just turn it up enough so that you can actually hear something,
Mhm.
and then he'll go like this to the audience. And I've seen him do this in front of 2,500 people, and the audience is dead silence, hear a pin drop, and he'll start playing with one hand. So there's almost no sound, and he has every person hanging on every note. So I think the guitar is capable of a tremendous, as great a range of dynamics as any instrument.
Oh yeah, amplified.
Um, and even an acoustic guitar, I mean, it's going to have its limitations. It's not like an electric guitar plugged into an amplifier that could be very, very, very loud. But the best musicians um, utilize dynamics. Dynamics are essential to them, to their expression. So Jimi Hendrix, if you think of the way he plays rhythm guitar on Little Wing or on Castles Made of Sand, versus his solos on Voodoo Child or something like that. You know, he's expressing a very wide range of musical dynamics and sounds.
Oh yeah. Even though I remember Santana on his, I think Abraxas album on the track "Incident in Nessebar," right, where
Oh yeah,
there's one point where you can barely hear, like he totally, and then he swells the volume.
yeah, yeah,
It's just gorgeous. Yeah. And
yeah.
Santana also said something I like. He said electric guitar is the only instrument where if it's played in a certain way, it's kind of like as if it's praying and swearing at the same time.
uh, yeah. Well, like Jimmy Vaughn. As you may know, I wrote a book about Stevie Ray Vaughan called Texas Flood Inside Story Stevie Ray Vaughan, and Jimmy Vaughn wrote the epilogue for the book. And in his epilogue, he said that when he listens to Stevie play, he can hear Stevie talking to him. And people have asked me, what was Stevie Ray Vaughan like as a person? And I say, well, the feeling you get when you listen to him play, this sense of a person and their personality. And everyone says, yeah, if they're a fan of Stevie Ray Vaughan, they know exactly what I mean. And I say, well, that was him. I mean, the feeling you get when you hear him play, that was him. It really was. He
Mhm.
was just like that, whatever that is. You
Yeah,
can't really put it into words. But that was him. His playing was a true expression of his unique personality.
and that's I would say that's also you. Like what catches my ear when I hear you playing, that touch, that's you. I think you have
Oh,
very,
that's really cool.
you do have very like yourself touch that I really appreciate. It has
Oh, thank you. That's like the best thing anybody could
no,
ever
believe
say.
me, it has
Thank you.
something to it. Another guy, I don't know if you know Kirk Fletcher.
I know Kirk really well. Kirk
Kirk,
is a friend of mine.
Kirk has this touch, that like I watch him.
He's, yeah, and you know what? He's a beautiful, beautiful
Yeah,
person.
you can sense it right away.
Oh, he's like a big teddy bear, you
Yeah,
know.
and
And so you hear it.
you hear it. Like the moment he touches the guitar, I'm like, What's that?" I'm like, "How is he doing it?" And I cannot do it. Right? I try and I was trying to figure out some things, and I just can't do it. Like as if he has different strings or something's different, right? Very unique.
I could tell you something that John McLaughlin told me because one of the great benefits of having been a writer for all these years is I've had the opportunity to interview so many of my heroes and favorite players. So John McLaughlin is a guy I interviewed uh, a couple of times, and in an interview I did with him in 1986, he said that a good thing to do when you play is try not to play with any specific articulation, meaning don't to try this. Don't think about picking hard or picking light or fretting hard or vibratoing every note. Or he said try to play in the most plain, just I'm making a note like in the plainest way I can. I'm just going to make notes. I'm not trying to make them sound like this or that or express happiness, joy, beauty, ugliness. He said, just play notes. And he goes, if you can do that, that's when you'll hear yourself the most. Because you can't help but make a sound that's you. And some of these other things can actually get in the way of hearing yourself because you're using your editorial ear and editorial mind to say, oh, you know, uh, I listen to Clapton, so the vibrato needs to sound like this, or you know, Jeff Beck, the pick attack should be like that. He says if you eliminate all that, then that's where we get to you.
Mhm. Yeah, I think he mentioned in one interview that the hardest thing is to for you to get out of the way, out of the picture.
Always.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's what he's talking about. You're interfering. You are, yeah, editorializing.
You have to listen, like, I mean, I was a big Ornette Coleman fan. As soon as I discovered him when I was 17, I heard him on the radio. I found out who it was, and I went and bought every record I could buy. And he would talk about, he'd write his own liner notes, and in the liner notes, he'd talk about listening playing, where he himself, while he was playing saxophone, would be listening, putting um, as much of his concentration as possible on listening to the bass player and the drummer. So he wouldn't be listening to himself. He would be playing, but everything he played was um, in response, as a reaction to what he was hearing from the other guys. And he said if the bass player did the same thing, everything the bass player played was because he was listening to the saxophone and the drums, and everything the drummer played was because he was listening to the bass and the sax. That there was now this three-way thing creating the music because the saxophone was influenced by the bass, who was influenced by the sax, who was influenced by the drums, who was influenced by the bass.
Mhm. They feed
And
off it.
now there is no leader. There is a group consciousness that takes over, a group personality.
Mhm.
You know, two becomes 10, three becomes like 100. It, and then it becomes this other thing that the three musicians hear that they would never hear if they were playing alone. They hear this other thing, this other message that's being communicated because it's the three of them. And so, I think when you listen to the Jimi Hendrix Experience play Manic Depression, that's exactly what you're hearing. You're hearing this fourth thing that comes from when you have a guitar, you're hearing a guitar, you're hearing a bass, you're hearing a drummer. But there's this fourth thing that is that combination creates something that, you know, the cliche is the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. Um, so it's this other creature,
Yeah,
you know,
wow, that's
this
it.
other being, all of a sudden, forms and right before us.
Yeah, and I also experienced that in terms of sound. At one point, I had a bunch of friends over, and we were recording some song. And then, as I was fiddling with microphones, and I wanted to, you know, capture the sound of the room, three of the guys were playing acoustic guitars. I think they were playing "As Tears Go By" the Stones, fingerprint. And I distinctly heard a fourth sound, which is like just
Oh yeah,
it was. I don't think you can capture that in the microphone. I thought this is like something you can hear acoustically live in the room. It
right.
was very palpable fourth, like some, but it's a special sound of its own, hanging up in the air.
Yeah.
It was
Well,
amazing.
it's probably there are things called sympathetic vibrations, and they're audible, and they're the result of you have a wave here and you have another wave here, and then when they cross, this third thing happens. And we used to find that when we sang three-part harmony, and my band's going way back, and if we really, really were in tune, really in tune, you'd hear a fourth note above everything else that was created by the chord. When you play guitar, there's sympathetic vibration in the string, so you can play two notes and you'll hear a third note because it actually is being created somehow on the instrument. Um, but uh, the laws of physics are fascinating and not necessarily completely understood, which is good
Yeah,
because when you hit a guitar or you hit a drum or you hit a cymbal, it's just this collection of vibrations, and some loud, some barely audible, but it's all like a flavor, like a taste. It all contributes to affecting you, how you feel, how you take it in. You know what, Alex? I have to go.
sure.
So we could do more tomorrow if you
Yeah,
want.
let's do it. This is, I think,
I'll pay
starting
attention. You know what? Text me. Now
text.
you
I
have
will
my
text
number.
you. It's more reliable. Okay, thank you, Andy.
All right,
Continue.
we'll hook up tomorrow.
Hook up tomorrow. Okay, have a great evening.
All right, great. All right,
Ciao.
see you later.
See you. Bye bye.